Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm your host, Corey Angelot, here with my co-host, Aaron Butler, and here with a very special guest, somebody who has a lot of years of experience. He's a former United States Marine and a 30-year veteran of law enforcement and security. In addition to hospital and prison security work, he is a respected martial arts trainer who has competed in some combat sports, but concentrates primarily on real-world self-defense. Dan is his name. Dan Arnold is an ACE certified fitness instructor and is currently an NRA certified firearms instructor with marksmanship awards for both pistol and rifle. He's a, sorry if I say this correctly, Baptist certified Baptiste.
Yeah, Baptiste.
Certified yoga teacher, speaker, and researcher. My goodness, so much. You're also the author of Violence and Ego, Understanding the Principles of Functional Self-Defense, and Rise from Darkness. Who are they, in quotes? And your website is spiritualanarchist93.com. So that's quite a bit right there to unpack, and I think we can go into this because what we're going to talk about mainly is how you escaped the cult of enslavers. So maybe give us a little bit of context on what you mean by cult of enslavers first.
Well, I came to understand that any type of law enforcement or military is basically you're a paid mercenary. And it's, oh God, I'm so angry from what's happening last week with those kids in Texas. Okay, I got stuff to say about that. So I'm trying to like hold my anger in at the same time. They work for the cult of order givers, and they are the order followers, and it's all one satanic cult. And it's never made more clear than when you're working in this line of work and you're at this internal, you got this like strife going on within yourself. If you have a conscience, there's a lot of contradictions in it. And there's a lot of people who got into it for what they consider to be, the right reasons to protect and serve. But then they find out that they're not really protecting and serving shit, but what these immoral politicians want you to. There's too much what I would call selected enforcement of certain classes, of certain races even. The biggest thing I had to deal with in my career that I didn't like was just giving out minor misdemeanor tickets. Like, I didn't want to be Mr. Mean-er. I didn't want to give those out. I did once, and I did a couple times, but after I made this lady cry, I'm like, fuck that. I'm not doing this no more. So, and I got in trouble for it. And I've been speaking out openly for a couple years, but especially the last year about all this, and I'm losing money because of it. So they're fucking with me still, and I don't give a shit. But yeah, that's what I consider to be the cult. It's become abundantly clear. Not only will they use excessive force, and I was a use of force instructor in that line of work as a defensive tactics instructor. They will use excessive force in order to. And then they will stand down and do absolutely nothing, which is still an action. Doing nothing is an action when they're told to. And that doing nothing is cowardly. My whole thing about, law enforcement is your main thing is to protect and serve. And hey, guys in Texas, you just had a really great chance to protect and serve. And forget about the rest of that oath. Just the oath to protect. And you blew it. Okay, because you guys you're immoral. They had a chance to. It's an immoral. It's wrong employment, is what it boils down to. I really had to come to that realization back in 2019, and I can go on and on. Like that's why you guys ask questions. But like since I grew my hair out, they want me to do. They asked me if I wanted to come back and do Vice.
I can relate to a lot of what you said. My background, I've been a firefighter and EMT for about 6 years, and so I spent a lot of time with law enforcement and even inside hospitals. And what really woke me up was, like you said, it's a selective. If they like you, if they know you, if they know your family or whatever, you're part of the club. But if they don't know you and you're a stranger to them, they're going to steal from you, give you tickets, take your time, give you misdemeanors and whatever. But that was a huge wake up call when you find out that it is just a little club, even in your small hometown or your county. it's a club, and if you're not in it, you're at the other end of the stick, you know.
It was the same thing because one of the departments I'm not going to name that I was on had its own very real life Game of Thrones going on. And if you're not in the clique, you know, everyone's fighting and backstabbing each other to try to get promoted because order following is not a natural state. The 5-year-old in every single one of us wants to say, "You're not the boss of me." So every cop does not want to be, they want to become a higher level order follower and get promoted. So the amount of backstab, I'm not saying there isn't some type of camaraderie in some little cliques in some places, but I think we all start to, as human beings, assimilate our environment, you know, which is like when I worked in a prison, I had to be very careful because there are very evil people in the prison. But there were some very nice people in the prison that shouldn't have been in there. People doing drugs, people smoking marijuana, they shouldn't have been in there.
Victimless,
you know, and they're victimless crimes, and they're in there with a guy literally who ate people in one of my pods, fucking Dr. Lecter, next to a guy who was in there because he was dealing marijuana.
Wow.
And what kind of education does that give to somebody who's in there for dealing marijuana, and he's, you know, he's in there with murderers and people who eat people?
Well, you have, yeah.
It's monetized. The whole prison system to a criminal justice system is monetized. And as soon as that starts to happen, it's the same thing with healthcare. It becomes corrupted.
Yeah, totally. Well, you have the caged, and then the people who keep people in cages. You know, who's really better in that situation.
That was a tough job too, because we run into some things, and there's just some really evil people that belong in there. But like in a real anarchist society, and we're not going to get into that like immediately, it's going to take some years to rise to that level of consciousness, not a large level, not just a little village here or there. Those kind of people that can't be rehabbed to be, see you next life. You know, following a true self-defense principle, bye. You know, you just hurt a kid, you just murdered somebody, bye.
Reciprocal.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into where you see people like in jail and they have different offenses, and you're like, well, they're all in the same condition. They all have the same punishment. You know, how is that justice? Justice should be reciprocal accordingly to the action that was committed. And, you know, even in a free world, people can set up court systems, right? They can set up common law courts, perhaps, and they can still settle things, disputes, two people, voluntary. If they want to settle something, they bring it to somebody, and they see them as honest and equitable, etc., then they're going to probably use that as a service. These things are still going to exist. There's still such a thing as justice, perhaps, in a free society. And it's interesting hearing from somebody who was involved in a justice system that a lot of people may be aware of a government type of system, and how we may be able to compare that to how it'd work in a free system. So I want to kind of go more into that then. What made you get involved with law enforcement, if I may ask? Like, how'd you get involved in the first place? What made you want to?
Man, to protect and serve. I watched G.I. Joe as a kid. I watched cop shows. I've seen Eddie Murphy go to L.A. and swing around on the back of a truck and be a hero doing whatever, although he was just trying to bust people for, you know, cigarettes. You know, we're socially engineered, so that's how we're going to serve. And if you think back to, you know, the early 90s when we had like the Gulf War and stuff going on, you'd see these billboards, right? And I put this on one of my earlier podcasts. My early podcasts really sucked. They're getting a little bit better, but in the beginning they were complete. That was a train wreck. But the billboards, you know, cops, military, your heroes, right? And in 2020, those billboards were gone. And next thing you know, it's medical people and doctors and nurses are the new heroes. So it's all social engineering. I got into it because I believed I was going to make a difference. I believed that I was serving something greater than myself. And, you know, lo and behold, I found out I was, but it wasn't good. That's the hard part. You know, I get upset about it. I drove by like a couple of years back. I drove by a police car. I'm no longer a cop. But I drove by and I'm like, God, they can't be the bad guys. You know, and keep in mind, I was an abused kid. So when the police would show up at my house, they took the bad man away. You know, so they were my fucking heroes. And to find out and to see this is what they're doing and then to be involved in the work. And what happens is you get involved with it and you become a great conflict with yourself. And next thing you know, you become real bitter. I was bitter. Still am. I'm still working on it. I'm 75% better in the public. You know, I had someone tell me down in Float Fresh that she admired me because I didn't wait till I was 100% better to start getting out there. She didn't want to put herself out there, so she knew she was completely healed. No, I'm still half a train wreck. I've had trains stop in front of my house to say, hey, what's Dan doing? I mean, literally, if I waited till I was 100%, I wouldn't be talking. The world's burning.
Wow.
So I'm healing in plain view. Maybe it'll be the name of my third book, Healing in Plain View.
Here you go. Honestly, your experience is powerful. I mean, because like having that experience is something that I can't say I have. To be in their system and then to leave it, to have that perspective and to see them as your heroes, and then to say, wait, are they really? Like that's incredible. I mean, because I consider myself very heavily order following when I was a kid. I wasn't very unobedient. A lot of the kids were disobedient to their authorities. I wasn't. I was the one who followed orders all the time, but yet here I am now, not really, following orders of authorities and questioning now everything that is said to me. Isn't that interesting how that works?
I was a terrible order follower. Okay. And what I mean by that is I had good, employee evaluations and stuff like that. I left back in 2015 of my own free will. I wasn't under any duress to quit. It wasn't like I was some bad cop who took, bribes and shit like that. But I forgot what I was going to say. Anyways, I got a story. So I had this captain I worked with who used to, and this is in my book. I tell stories in my book. That's all I do is I tell the stories. And this was a captain I worked with. He was another former United States Marine. And he used to call me IA, and it stood for Individual Arnold. Okay, as in, we just want to be an individual now, don't we? Well, because in the Marine Corps, that's what the drill instructors would say to you. You screw up, you're not working as part of the unit. They want worker bees. They want drones. They want people who, they train you for immediate obedience to orders. So you'll follow the orders without question. And so if you were not doing that, they'd say it was like a joke. Oh, so we're just an individual now. I'm trying to sound like a drill instructor. We're just an individual. So he started calling me Individual Arnold because my last name's Arnold. And I thought that was funny because 2 years ago when I was writing that in my book and telling that story, they don't want, I am an individual, but what they want is they don't want IA as Individual Arnold. They want AI as an artificial intelligence. And I wrote that back in 2020, and boy, is that out there now, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, man, when you were saying that, I had a lot of ideas pop up, but another thing that also comes to mind is how many people I talk to who are former, not just police, but veterans as well. They fought in the war, and how many of them from those experiences start to really realize what's happening. Surreal experiences. Some of them, it's like they don't expect to get into it. It leaves a trauma with them. And so, it's interesting how they go from this cause, like you said, of I'm doing this for a moral higher purpose. And then they really question, is it moral? Who are these people that I'm fighting? Who is it these people I'm coercing?
Right.
Do they have the right to be coerced? What are their rights? Did they ever go over what a right is when you were in law enforcement?
No, not what a real right is. And I have a friend of mine he's my adopted son. He's in the Marine Corps and he's a sergeant. I've been trying to talk him to get him out, getting out because he hasn't been involved in any conflicts. And I'm like, I want you out before you're the first kid on your block with a confirmed kill. I don't want you fighting for this bullshit. So I'm working on getting him out. And I don't talk to him like that all the time, but sometimes I do, I asked him one day, and this was a couple years back, so do you know what a right is? What's your right? And he's like, well, whatever I'm legally allowed to do or whatever I'm told I'm able to do. And it's like, oh my God, that's not a right.
That already assumes that it's not nature. It's not natural. Yeah.
Right. And when I first heard it put that way by, Mark Passio, I don't like to mention his name every time I talk about natural law, but the guy's kind of known, right?
Yeah.
It was funny when I called into his show and I said that, he's like, oh, really? It was like funny, but when I heard him put it that way, man, that was like a real wake up that our rights are verbs. They're not adjectives. They are verbs. And when I explained that to him, to this my adopted son, he was like, you could almost see their eyes, like they don't get it. It's almost like when I got into this debate with a friend of mine, and she was all angry. She's a feminazi, and she was all angry, that I was debunking everything she had to say about, this experimental gene therapy that they want to shoot into all of us. And see, what's going on is she used to be more awake than she is. She works at a hospital now, so she's her opinion is formed by her pocketbook, like so many people. And, for me, because I'm speaking out, I'm losing money. They're screwing with my retirement, which I don't care. For right now, I'm okay. But I mean, I knew that was going to happen eventually. So you can't be afraid of that. It is what it is.
Have you ever, this is a side question, but it might relate to some of the people who are watching. Have you ever had an experience dealing with people who call themselves sovereigns, or people who are not U.S. citizens, perhaps?
Okay. No, not personally, but what we would get with these, we would get these texts over the law enforcement computer program, NCIC or leads, and then they would give us like in a roll call, be careful. There's these groups that we've been seeing around here. They're called the sovereign citizens, and they don't recognize, our authority. They don't recognize the state. They don't recognize this and that, and they're giving people a lot of trouble. And I'm immediately thinking, I'm working over in gang territory, man. And this was a point where I was working over with some really murderous gangs, bad stuff. And I'm thinking, these people are even worse than that, because, I was even, this was, 10, 15 years ago. I'm like, whoa, I got to be careful. Now I'm like, oh my God, I'm one of them. And so is everyone I know, like literally, like not a sovereign citizen. I would never want to murder a cop, or murder anybody, but I get where they're coming from. They don't want to recognize your authority if you're a cop. And you know what? You don't have any. You don't have any. I purposely got this anarchy symbol inside of a 5-point star because I wanted to wear a new badge, but it's anarchy. I want freedom over my heart, not the stuff that they're doing.
Wow, that's awesome.
I know who they are as far as the sovereign citizens, but my opinion of what they are has definitely improved since back then. But I never had to deal with any of them.
Yeah. We're going to feature some on the summit. I hope people will stay tuned and see that as well, because it can help us achieve more freedom within our lives, to recognize more of who we are, of course, to understand ourselves. And this is a common theme among a lot of the people we talk to, is learning from yourself and learning and seeking what's inside. So you also got into martial arts, right? What made you get involved with martial arts? Was it you getting into law enforcement, or was that a separate pursuit?
No, I've been in martial arts since I was 10.
Wow.
So some of the stuff that I had to, I grew up in a city that was, I had a lot of fights as a kid, right? Self-defense situations as a kid. In school, as you get older, you don't just go and get into fights anymore. It ain't like that. Most of my adult violence or fights came from in the line of duty. And I can go in so many different directions. I became a martial artist because I never again wanted to see myself or anyone I loved be bullied on again. I wanted to be able to protect myself. So I got into it for self-defense and stayed in it my whole life, and I'm still in it. And I still train to the degree that I can. As I'm getting older, I'm 51 years old now. As you get older, you have to balance out. Balance is the key to everything. It's even the key to vices. It's the key to everything. So I had to slow down some of my training, but I still train. I'm not going to stop martial. The day I die, I'll probably have done some kind of training that day. Something. I don't care if it's Tai Chi. So yeah, I've been in martial arts a long time. Although I don't think I'm Bruce Lee or anything. I've been told I'm decent at it.
And you mentioned functional self-defense in your book. May I ask what that is?
Yes, you may. Functional self-defense would be what Bruce Lee would call the daily subtraction, not the daily addition of techniques. So one of the things I talk about functional self-defense is Well, you got unarmed fighting. You got armed fighting with a knife or a stick. You got tactical stuff with firearms. You got empty hand stuff. So functional would be coming up with a concept that works across all those planes. Sort of like, you know, in the Hermetic principles, every principle is working across every other plane of every other principle. Well, if you can come up with a concept for all those different disciplines of fighting, self-defense, whatever, and that concept applies to all of them, that's less you have to remember. So it becomes more functional.
Okay.
So that's some of the stuff I talked about and covered in the book.
Right.
I also talk about, see, there's a lot of ego in the law enforcement community. There's a lot of ego in martial arts. A lot of people have this, usually they have this overinflated sense of what they can actually do versus, or what they think they can do versus what they can actually do. And, or they have one type of martial arts that they, you know, they're egoically, you know, kind of attached to. Like, I break the martial arts down into 3 categories. I'll go through this real quick. It's reality-based self-defense, sport, you know, combat sport, and traditional. So traditional martial arts would be more like you see guys doing katas, and they do bone hardening and traditional stuff like that, and karate, taekwondo. Even Muay Thai is actually a traditional martial art, even though it's a combat sport. Combat sports, on the other hand, is you're not trying to actually kill somebody. You're just, you know, working around, you're sparring, and it's really good for timing and distancing. Because you need that live training. And like I said, I think everybody at one point in their life should be punched in the face just to see that they're not fragile and that they can take it. And combat sports will kind of do that. It helps develop character, but it's not real life, because if you put your mind into that, you're going to get yourself killed out there. Reality-based self-defense is scenario-based. Reality-based self-defense is understanding that all violence is, as far as fighting is concerned, is either, you know, a self-defense situation, or, you know, when you've already probably been hurt. Okay, you've already taken damage. So really, self-defense is the ability to fight while you're already hurt. Or it's a duel, you know, an ego-driven duel. And it could be a combat sport, MMA, or 2 guys in a bar puffing out their chest because of a chick or whatever. And, hey, we're going to go out in the parking lot and fight. Yeah, I agree to fight you. It's still violence, but it's a duel. So it's either agreed upon, or you're not a party to that situation. You want nothing to do with it, or it's self-defense. So I get into that kind of stuff in the book too. And I think that a good balance has to be struck between those 3 types of martial arts. Yeah. Traditional, combat sport, and reality-based. If you got that right balance, you're good. So I talk about how you could find an instructor that can, like, give you that balance.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important to mention in my view, because people can have that knowledge, and that knowledge is just like learning how to grow food. It's something that will last with you and help you survive.
Right.
So it's something that, and I don't know, you know, not a lot of people will necessarily talk about it. A lot of the guests that we have on the summit. So I figured, you know, you would have a lot of expertise on that. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. You also mentioned that you experience a lot within your book, because I read some of it and I really liked it. I like how it's worded as well. And you mentioned that you experienced the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
So could you explain a little bit about that? Because this all plays into how you've come to be. And
yeah, it really does. And so back in 2014, I had what I would call the dark night of the soul. And without going into great details in the book, I'll say, you know, I had some unhealthy coping mechanisms. Okay. Out of balance behaviors, out of balance habits. And they caught up with me. And I was basically talked into volunteering myself to go into a psychiatric ER, emergency room, which ended up in a voluntary, like 6-7 day psych ward admittance. Okay. Well, on that particular day, I mean, I can really get into so many different things. I don't want to come at this the same way I originally did when I put the book out there, because I want people to read the book and understand, hey, man, this is an action-packed fiction on what can happen to a person if they're working for a law enforcement agency of some kind and they get thrown under the bus because they got hurt on duty. Okay. So I want people to understand that this could happen. So what ended up happening was they gave me the cocktail when I was in the psych ER. The cocktail is what calms you down. Okay. So you want to talk about Tales from the Crypt, Natural Law? You know how many times I was on call to protect staff while they gave that cocktail to somebody, which is just a cocktail to calm them down. And now all of a sudden they wanted to do it to me. And I found out that one of the officers went up to went to the captain and said, "Hey man, this is Dan we're dealing with. Do we have a plan in case he fights?"
Wow.
Or whatever. And the captain was like, "Well, just pepper spray him and hope for the best." Right? Not like thinking back on it, I get goosebumps because I think their plan was to murder me, to be honest with you. Because on paper, I'm this like tough dude on paper. In real life, I'm not. I'm scared a lot. I'm even nervous talking now. And anytime I do something, I'm nervous. I just do it anyway.
You're human.
Yeah, exactly. So, I know I can handle myself in a fight, but on paper, I'm way tougher than I am in real life. Okay. And especially what they had, down. Their threshold for deadly force with me because of that would have been a lot lower than someone else. So now when they came in to offer me the cocktail, okay, I'll take it. If it's going to make them relax, then I'm not going to do something, and it's going to make me more relaxed. I know what the cocktail does. It puts you to sleep. So it put me to sleep for a while. Wake up, they gave it to me again. Okay, this is all in the psych ER.
Okay.
And then later on, before they transferred me, they gave me a couple other shots, like right before I got to the ward. And I'm thinking to myself at that time, because I was tired and a little out of it, why are they giving me more stuff? And I'm like, okay, and again, this is in connection to a government medical facility that'll remain unnamed over public stuff for right now. But they know who I'm talking about, so that's why I'm getting my retirement messed with. They gave me something, and if you read that part of my book, I was very descriptive in what I experienced, and I think what I experienced was some form of DMT mixed with some other type of hallucinogen, because I had a very dark experience when I was in that ward. The walls were coming alive, shit was happening, and I knew that I was hallucinating. Okay, and it all boils down to. And here's about that hallucination. I've heard DMT is intense, only 15 minutes, but there's other forms of like LSD and other type of stuff that can last a day or two. Well, the most intense part of it only lasted that night, but I was still like having after effects for like a day or two. The next day I was still like, wow. I mean, I was better, but they gave me a cocktail of something. I knew I have enough training to know that something was wrong when I was going through this main hallucinating. And what it all boils down to is the questions they asked me the next day. So they sit you down. First off, let me back off. I'll back up for 1 second real quick. The reason why most people don't go to get help is because the helping mechanism itself is very dehumanizing. Okay? Very dehumanizing. You go to get help, next thing you know, they're making you get naked and they're looking at your butthole. Tell me who wants to do that. You got to get strip searched. The whole process is dehumanizing as hell. And I put that in the book. So now fast forwarding to these questions they have to ask you. They put you on these panels with psychologists and psychiatrists and everything. And there's one main guy who I know. See, there's lots of little nuances that I get into in the book a little bit, but probably not as far as I should. This was some MK Ultra shit because I knew who he was. I recognized him from other stuff, from other work that I did, and he's asking me all these questions. So what it all boils down to is this. They had a line of questioning that they did with me. And the very last question was, were you hallucinating last night? Okay. So this is a trick on interview and interrogation. And this was a psych doctor. They had a gauge. They had a baseline on my answers to all their other questions. But they already knew the answer to that last question. So now that would give them the definite gauge on, was I telling the truth for these other questions versus that last question, were you hallucinating last night? And I was like, no, sir. Wow. I was hallucinating my ass off. And he knew I was lying. The way he looked at me, he knew I was lying. So, you know, here's the thing. They tried to get me to cheat on my wife. They wanted to get footage of me cheating on my wife. They tried to get a couple friends to turn against me. There's a lot of little operations that were going on. I think they were also afraid that I might have known something. You know, who knows? There were some other things going on. And if they can isolate you like that, what if I would have told the truth? Yeah, I was hallucinating. What if I would have not known that they gave me something? And I said, yeah, I was hallucinating. Then they would have had the excuse they needed to start giving me antipsychotics. Do you know what that does to a person who's not psychotic?
Makes you psychotic.
It makes you psychotic.
Yeah.
So what happens is you get lost in that, and they can then have this narrative that Dan just lost his mind and blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't have help on the outside. But I had help on the outside because my wife was showing up. My family was showing up. People came there. So this isn't some lone veteran that we can just go ahead and fuck up now. So that was a dark night of the soul. So now to get to the supernatural stuff that I started experiencing, it seemed to happen a few months after that. So like, I know ayahuasca and DMT sometimes open up these portals for people to be, you know, all of a sudden become more spiritual. Maybe it opened up something for me, but I was starting to get, I would almost say telepathic communications with animals, with birds, a lot of bird signs and stuff coming like that. And no, it wasn't like Dr. Doolittle. I didn't have a conversation with the bird. How you doing, Dan? How you doing, Mr. Bird? It wasn't like that. What it ends up being like is you get an impression. Okay, you get an impression. It's more like a statement from the animal. And you have to understand that animal is, if it's an animal that's not from your area normally. So it's not really a local that's there a lot, or it is from your area, but it's completely acting out of character. Like, that's not how a robin acts. That's not how a dove acts. And what were you contemplating? What made a contemplation? What were you thinking about? Or what action had you taken that brought about all of a sudden this spirit guide getting there? And I started to notice I started to notice a pattern with it. In fact, I still do. I was listening to just a few weeks back. It was the very last show of that Mark did on Thelema. He's taking calls, and some of the synchronicities in the calls and what people were saying, like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So I'm like, maybe I should call in. I know I've talked to him once, but maybe I should call back in. And I've got the pictures. I'll post them. This dove lands down underneath a tent, comes and just looks at me. And I'm like, no, this can't be still happening, man. You know, so I scoot over a little bit so the dove can't see me. The dove hops over and just looks at me. It's not acting like a bird. It's not acting nervous from predators. It's on the ground where there's cats. Normally birds want to be up above things. So I had a lot of that kind of stuff happen. Some of it was happening in conjunction with my bad habits. Did I have self-control? Or did I not have self-control when I was trying to get over certain unhealthy coping mechanisms? Did I exercise self-control that day, which is like a muscle? The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Or did I give in to some lower base desire? So this was some of the stuff that I started to experience, and I hadn't started to experience this until the spring of 2015, and it got crazy in 2017, actually, after I nearly died. It was nuts. That was nuts. I remember I was doing the dishes, and I was having the best time of my life doing the dishes because I was alive. I had almost just died. My back problem had me like paralyzed, and they were giving me all this medication. They were giving me Dilaudid every 3 to 4 hours. So you want to talk about withdrawals? I was in the hospital for like 6 days, 7 days, unable to walk. They let me go on the 8th day. They gave me hydromorphone or something that's like the pill form of Dilaudid. And I was editing my first book when I got home, Violence and Ego. And I was on it for like 8 hours. I just got on it, and I had like 400 corrections to make. because of this company that messed me up, and they gave me back that's a whole other story. But I had to make these corrections, and then all of a sudden, like by the end of that day, I'm feeling like, what's wrong with me? I felt terrible. I thought I was going to die. Like I had never felt so just bad, hurting, headache, bad headache, everything, just like this sense of doom. And I call my mom because she's a nurse, and I tell her what's going on. She's like, honey, have you been taking your pain meds? I'm like, no. She's like, you need to take one. After 8 days of taking Dilaudid, she's like, you're going through withdrawals. So this whole experience, I had never gone through withdrawals before, but yet I had dealt with many people who had. Okay. Now, was I as compassionate towards them as I should have been? Maybe not.
Because you didn't experience it yourself.
Maybe not. And maybe natural law, maybe this was several years later. Maybe this is my own karma. Hey, hey, bro, check this out. This is how this is. Just like when you did standbys at the psych ER for somebody who is talking about other dimensions and they think he's crazy. Well, with what I've experienced, he might not be, but they're forcing medication. So you're there, and this is giving me issues too, to protect staff while this person gets forced fucking medications. Which bothers me because you're the lowest level of force, okay, that any law enforcement can have. I'll tell people this all the time, or I'll ask, do you know what the lowest level of force is? And we have to tell officers, your presence, if you're in a uniform, your presence is the lowest level of force because it's got a suggestion to it. It's coercive. So the threat of force is there for that patient. And that's, hey, I got to deal with that myself. So that's part of that's in this book. And this is what I talk about, my negative consequential effects of natural law based on my employment.
Yeah.
And so but go ahead.
No, it's so powerful because you went from, being in this system of, like you said, ego and may you say materialism, and going to a spiritual position. Out of that is just amazing. And you go over sort of what I see as the golden rule, right? Do unto others what you want done unto you. Right. And that basically is morality in a nutshell.
Yes.
And so if we can now, tie this into what people must know, what you think people must know based on your experience, how would you tie that up? What would you say that people must know from all your experience?
Well, I'm going to get to that back at the dishes. I'm doing the dishes. A blue jay lands on the fence. Again, a low fence. Looks at me for a little bit, and then its head just starts going up and down crazy, and it's yelling at me. All kinds of stuff. Well, they say if a blue jay is visiting you, it could be like a dearly departed, female family member. And I was like, that's my nana. That's my grandmother. And she's cussing at me in Sicilian. Like, get your shit together. You almost just died, But anyways, that's the kind of stuff that I experienced with that. My message to anybody about this whole thing, my message is directly to order followers. Get out of your immoral line of fucking work. That's my main message. That's my main niche. I have just enough knowledge about natural law to know what I experienced as an order follower. From a point of self-preservation, get out of it. If you have any type of conscious, but from a point of just morality, my message is that the importance for order followers to understand what true objective morality under the creator, under creation is how we are. And I put this on the page of my front page of my website. Every atrocity throughout humanity has been committed by action takers, by order followers, mercenaries, and politicians, especially in America today, they obfuscate morals better than anybody. They operate in that little gray zone. See, there's black and white, how a lot of people think, but there's this real gray area that they like to operate in. And they want to obfuscate morals and make you think you're doing the good thing. Like what happened in Texas. Okay. I have a theory about that, but I'm not going to go with the theory. I'm going to go with the actual conspiracy. The conspiracy is order followers were given an order not to act while children were either being murdered or supposedly being murdered. That's the conspiracy. And they didn't, and they followed that fucking immoral order to not act. Let's go do a no-knock raid on some house, and it's the wrong house because the intelligence is wrong, and we murder somebody trying to protect his family. It's okay for that because it was for drugs and the state needs to get their tax money. But hey, kids are being murdered. Let's stand down and act like retards while kids are being murdered. And you got a whole fucking SWAT team there. I served on 2 SWAT teams. Excuse my language. I start getting very pissed about it. I served on 2 different SRT teams. I wouldn't have followed that order. You know, one time in 2001, I was working in a city hospital, and this guy, we had to strap down this patient. Okay, soft restraints. They brought him in from an outside. It was an outside agency. Brought him in. The guy grabbed him by the throat, fucking hit him across the face a couple times. I'm like, I grabbed the dude. I throw the dude down. I did my fucking job and stopped him. Then I wrote him up, and he got fired. He's from another agency. But that's what you're supposed to do. Do your job. That's what protecting is. Kids were being murdered, and you didn't go in. Now, you want to hear my theory on that?
Sure.
My theory is there might not have even been any murders going on. My theory is that somebody could have been hired from the government to go in there and shoot rounds into the ground because there was no resource officer. Shoot rounds into the ground. They make an announcement in the school. There's an active shooter, you know, go do active shooters. You know, they hear the gun going off. That's going to reverberate through a school like you wouldn't believe. And everyone panics. Everyone's in fear, thinking some, you know, mass shootings going on. And we've already seen in the world what fear makes people believe. And there might not have been no shooting. Now, if you have some guy who's going to be doing that, this is just way out there. But if you had a guy who's not going to really be killing anybody, just going to be making it seem like there was, and you're shooting into the ground, would you want a resource officer in there who maybe is moral and would go towards the gunfire, turn the corner, see some dude shooting into the ground, and then that guy gets hosed? So that's my theory. It very well could have been completely fake. That's a theory. I don't think it was fake. They obviously do not care about murdering people. But I'm disgusted by the actions or the inactions that the cops took there. It's
scary to even think that they have the ability to do whatever they want if they wanted to. Yes. Right? Because they relating this back to slavery, claim to have a claim of ownership over other people or their property or businesses and schools over nearly everything, is it not? Are you aware of something called the slave patrol in the 1800s?
It sounds somewhat familiar, and it was to be put into opposition against the Underground Railroad when they were trying to rescue slaves, and sort of like a fifth column type of thing that were trying to rescue slaves, and that they were to find those slaves and return them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I just, I want to get your thoughts on this because relating this back to the idea of slavery, I mean, if you look at a lot of the roots of modern day policing, you find out the slave patrol.
Well, and a lot of times we were referred to as patrol officers, right? And I just think to myself, troll officers, and trolls need to be slayed, not laid. And that's one of the things that we used to always say, because friends of mine, I was always nicknamed Thor. So they're like, why don't you go out and kill some trolls or some frost giants or something? And, and back during my younger days when I was, a little more promiscuous and stuff, I had friends of mine say, slay the trolls, don't lay the trolls. And it was just a completely just off topic stuff, but they're called patrol officers, right? Trolls. So, it's kind of funny. Slave patrol and patrol officers, it's kind of the same thing. It's not funny. It's actually fucking sad, to be honest with you. And, I once had a friend, and when all this started kicking off back in 2020, I was trying to explain to 2 friends of mine. One of them was a feminazi, and she started, just puking out what the CDC says. And, she's like, well, didn't you once so proudly serve this government that you're talking bad about now? And I told her, pride is not the adjective I would use. Shame is the adjective I would use. Okay. And getting over that shame or that self-loathing, I'm over most of that. I'm not going to ever let shame be weaponized against me again. But there's still some anger. Now, is anger part of self-loathing? Could be, I guess. But the shame element isn't in anger. The anger that I have is what's leading me to take action. So it's what's going on is I've got this rage. It's anger, but it's like turning into a focused rage. And yes, some of it is leveled at myself for not waking up sooner. but it's more leveled at my handlers than it is anything else. And believe me, all of us got handlers. You guys got them too. Anybody in the One Great Work Network's got a handler out there. They're watching you. So it's more leveled at them than it is anything else. So it's turning into more of a focused rage. It's making me take action despite my fear response or fear that you just naturally have. Fear of whatever, public opinion, fear of losing money, fear of, I said to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? I become homeless? Who cares? I was in the infantry. I know how to live out in the woods for a little bit. I think I'd survive for a little bit. Like, I got all these personal problems going on, and I started to think to myself, my most personal problem right now is actually slavery. And, this is like another like little personal story. I don't want to put a lot of junk out there, but I was having a conversation with my wife back in the fall, and me and her have had some issues. And she was mad that I, paid for and donated to something that was very important to me. And it was when Derek was in town in Cleveland to do the what was he doing?
Activation tour?
The activation tour. Yeah. And Cleveland was not a hyperlink yet.
Okay.
Because there was no place to do it here yet. Well, I got a place, I secured it, and I wanted to meet him, and I wanted to see what that was about. I wanted to see, what was going on with that. And she was a little bit mad at me. And I was like, listen, you need to understand something. This cause is more important than you are to me. This cause is more important than my kids. And it's actually even more important than my own life, because if we lose this, none of that's going to be here anymore. So that's why I think, I like that I'm seeing more and more people coming together, because I think when we come together and realize, hey, don't worry about what kind of freedom you want. There's only freedom. I see different anarchists, kind of arguing with each other over whose anarchy is, whatever. And I jokingly said, hey, I was once in a subculture with a bunch of backstabbing. It was called law enforcement. I'm not getting into this to deal with that same bullshit. And this is what I would say to everybody. I'd look into and I mean this in humbleness, but I also mean this in all honesty. We have a larger enemy at the gate. Let's deal with that and forget about our own egos. That's the biggest thing that I see as the ego is the biggest thing, the biggest barrier to everyone coming together and actually having one concerted effort, as opposed to a bunch of minor spread out efforts, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah. Makes perfect sense. And I think experience does have to do a little bit about that, though, because you face the enemy face to face. And when you have a taste of their medicine, you start to really understand, okay, all this conjecture is not actually important. How labor and money is produced, these other man-made material things. No, there's spiritual principles at hand, and you're finding them through these experiences that can be hard at times, but that the hardest times can also teach us the most if we put ourselves through, if we allow ourselves to learn from it, just as chaos as a teacher. You have a quote in your book. Do you mind if I read it?
No, go ahead, read it. Go ahead and read it.
It says, every action I take or think either comes from a space of fear or a space of love. Reaction gives away my power. Response takes away their power. So reaction gives away your power, and response takes away their power. Sorry, I read that wrong. But that's interesting. I like how you put that, because
I think I also added to that, I will never be freer the moment I am when I don't give a fuck what other people think about me. So that's in the book too, and I think that's how I ended that quote. And that's kind of hard, because we kind of care what other people think, but you have to function in a way where, okay, you'll take what other people think about you, but then you don't let it affect you for too long. Move on.
Applied to slavery.
Exactly. It's exactly what it is. And so don't become a slave to your own ego or a slave to what other people think about you, because then you're not going to get nothing done, and you live in a state of fear and anxiety instead of one of taking action despite fear. And like I said, I wanted to remain anonymous. I wanted the book to help people, but I wanted to be ambiguous. And
well,
I
I
realized that,
appreciate you putting yourself out there on the front lines. I really appreciate you. Like
thank you.
not for law enforcement, but for
No, thank
natural law
you.
enforcement.
Thank you. And as an aside, talking about that, like as a cop, I only put 2 people in prison my entire career. Both of them were rapists. They were both sex offenders. So I was kind of enforcing natural laws back then because I wouldn't mess with the little stuff. And, you know, they'd say to me, so what do you're too good to do the little stuff. You just want to do the big stuff. You don't want to write tickets, but you want to, you know, get rapists and murderers. And yeah, ain't that what we're supposed to be here for? And child killers? Active shooters,
Yeah.
you know, there's general orders that are on that are usually, you know, SOPs, standard operational procedures that departments will have, and or administrative rules and regulations that every state will have. And part of that in there is it is your duty to disobey immoral orders. And this is why the politicians are so good at obfuscating what morality is. And this is, again, why I believe objective morality is the key to getting law enforcement and military to quit their jobs or to understand what actual objective morality is and disobey orders. Arrest those giving you those orders. I mean, one or the other, because we can't just magically make, you know, all cops and military disappear. But if we can get them to start understanding objective morality and understanding the obfuscation that's going on with that, with gender, with everything, maybe then they can start questioning themselves. Have some self-reflection and introspection, because without those 2 things, there could be no forward growth for anybody in any endeavor. Like, it literally applies to everything. So that's, you know, one of my missions is just to, I think that's going to be my main niche. Try to get other order followers to stop doing it. I think there's a lot of good people in those lines of work that were just how and they're at conflict within themselves. They're just grumbled
people.
Yes. And then there's others who are just gleefully high and intoxicated with their supposed power. Okay. Yeah. They're still ego based. And a lot of those are those younger cops still, you know, 25 and under. But from what I'm seeing, I hate using ums in sentences, but from what I'm seeing, I think nurses and doctors are the biggest worry that I'm worried about. I'm more worried about them as order followers than I am anybody else, because literally everyone's doing what they're told to do.
It's anywhere you see any wrongdoing, right? If there's going to be people who permit that wrongdoing, then that wrongdoing is going to grow inevitably.
Yeah.
And I like to relate a lot of what you say to slavery, because to me, that's, you know, my perspective on it. And I don't use the word anarchist. I like to say abolitionist, because I talk about ending slavery. And, you know, it's essentially the same thing. We're recognizing that nobody should rule over anybody else. They don't have the right to, naturally. That's why I said you're sort of natural law enforcement.
Yeah. Oh, I still got a little star with the anarchy symbol on it now too. And then that was my martial arts school symbol, was the anarchy star. So when people would come in and question that, if I didn't want to like get in depth with them because I had something else going on, I'd be like, oh, that stands for Arnold, my last name, or it's hey, I'm a fan of the Avengers. You know, like I'm like, I want to just yell out to everybody, all these different types of anarchists. It's time, man. Anarchists assemble. Honestly, it's so I like to joke around with people like that when I don't want to take the time to, or I don't have the time to try to explain to them that anarchy just means no rulers.
Yeah, that's why I like abolitionists, because it makes people think, and it tackles slavery, which is a moral issue. It's not an ideology, and it's pointing to an action. And it worked before. So I was like,
you know what? It begins with an A. That's cool. You know, another thing is if all slavery was abolished, anarchy would naturally be there. That's what there'd be no rulers.
Well, it just so happens the abolitionists, most of them were anarchists as well.
Yeah.
And people don't know that. So it's powerful. How long would you say you were, we say this thing called statism, for people who don't know. It's the belief in authority, the belief that somebody has the right to rule you. Right. How long would you say you were a statist? How many years? I like to ask this question to everybody.
From the day I took my first breath, probably to the point where I was maybe 44 years old, 43 years old, and 42. That's when I had my dark night of the soul. But prior to that, it was happening in graduations. on realizing how screwed up it is, because it starts with realizing how screwed up and contradictive the system is. And then you start, you know, how the universe is fractal. Well, so is the government. I worked on several different levels of government, and the worse up you get, it's all the same. So as I started to realize there's all these contradictions at every level of government, they put the contradictions in the compartmentalization up there to confuse the hell out of you anyway. They want to keep you in a state of where they can, you know, and that state is not natural. So that's when I started to realize, I mean, look at the contradictions in the 7 deadly sins. It's all made to control humanity. And, you know, I can get into that in my opinion on why that is on some of those things. But I would say about that, I'd say like 44, 45 years old after my dark night of the soul in 2014. But when I nearly died in 2017, and I'd already gone through all this other stuff, is when I 100% knew. And I started experiencing all these signs, these supernatural signs that I called supernatural, that I now refer to, that I'm starting to understand them a little bit more simply natural. Things may have just been waking. They were always there. I just couldn't see them before. So now I was starting to see them because I was vibrating. I had a resonance and a vibration that drew that to me and allowed me to be able to actually see it. So that's when I set out to figure out the colloquial, to figure out the tie between what we would scientifically call natural law, the science of natural law. And, you know, again, science isn't like truth, nature's truth. Science is just a word we use to describe a process. So, but I set out to find the connection between science and the colloquial version of religion, because of what I was dealing with seemed to be a religious like experience. No, it was a spiritual experience. Now I'm coming to understand it was more of a consciousness experience. So that was in 2017 and 18. I wrote the first words to my book in August 5th, 2018 is when I wrote the first paragraph of Rise from Darkness. And then that's when I came across Hermetic Principles, and I ended up coming across those early in 2019. And then later in 2019 came across Mark's work and started doing more research on stuff. And, you know, I wish I would have woke up earlier. But yeah, a lot of years. I'll stay this for a lot of years. So I'm at the point now where I'm trying to have, you know, a little bit of empathy for people who look at you confused when you tell them you don't vote. And they try to tell you, well, it's your duty to vote. No, it's actually my duty not to vote. It's your duty not to vote also. Let's not, you know, encourage them. If they're going to pick what they want anyways, don't vote. So a lot of years, man, a lot more years than I care to admit. So I see guys who I know are probably half my age doing this work. And I'm like, wow, it's amazing that so many people woke up so quick and we're doing. And I put this in one of my podcasts also. There's people out there, and this was me talking directly to ex-order file. I'm an ex-order follower. This is me talking to current order followers. There's people out there following the oath you thought you were taking to protect and to serve. And I think back on it, and a lot of you guys are like half my age. So I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for you giving me this, you know, platform to even talk on. I'm thankful for everybody in the, you know, in the movement that I've been able to meet and talk to. And as soon as I started getting a little bit noticed, now my retirement's getting screwed with. I don't give a fuck. They can take everything. I don't care.
You have purpose.
Yeah. And you know, when you start getting more driven, you start getting a little bit more focused on something. I can put all my nervous energy into this, which is why I'm kind of living on my own now, so I can concentrate on mainly just this. I'd like to get, once I get things a little more in order by the end of this month, I want to get more like once a week, every week, do a podcast. Every week, you know, don't miss a week, you know, unless I absolutely have to. Every week, have a message to these order followers, because things are getting, they're going to get bad, is what I'm afraid of. And if we can get more order followers to quit the cult, well, even some of the most mediocre order followers have training that they can actually help, you know, the good side with. And then it's a perfect chance for them to fulfill that part of the oath that they thought they were taking. The part that guys like me pay attention to protect and to serve, not to also follow other laws that are passed, blah, 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 blah. Because guys like me don't hear a whole bunch of that, because we think to ourselves, well, we're not going to do any of that other stuff until you get stuck in that system and trapped. Just like politicians, some of them aren't bad. They don't get into it for bad reasons, but then they get turned. You can't. It's almost the system doesn't allow you to stay moral. And anyone who does stay moral, they get assassinated. So there's
because it's not moral to begin with, right?
Exactly. To me, that's the whole thing. Is they get when you start playing in an immoral system to do good, you become part of that system, and that in itself is going to attract, negative karma to you. So it's almost like I had that negative karma. I had to deal with the consequential effects. It's been a real wake up. It's been a real experience. If I can go back in time, I would have never done it, but again, 2020 hindsight is always there. And you have to have that 0 point from this point forward. What am I going to control? What am I going to do? How could I help for real? And I don't know. This is the last free country because we still got guns.
Yeah.
All these other countries are, and they're trying to do, that's why they're having all these. And that's what I talked about in, I think my last podcast, I might have talked about it, but that's what these false flags are about, because they want to enact red flag rules.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, that was amazing. I have one final question, unless Aaron has something that he wants to put up.
I always like to emphasize certain things when it comes to order followers, and I can relate so much to what Dan says. I really like to emphasize that order followers, it often gets associated with police and law enforcement, but if you think for 1 second that firefighters and EMTs and medical professionals, a lot of people more waking up to that. But if you think for 1 second that the power company isn't going to follow orders, or simple people, within the system of government and people that work for them, they're humans too, and they follow orders. And having experience in the field of following orders, things like implied consent or medical kidnapping, dosing someone on drugs because you don't want to deal with them, giving them a little bit of extra something because you're trying to calm them down.
Right.
It brings, not just because, like me having experienced it, it brings more empathy. And, these are our brothers and sisters, these people in law enforcement and that work for the county, work for the government, fix the roads, run the water. These people, they follow orders, but they're human too. And just bringing that to the equation. And Dan, amazing stuff, dude. Amazing stuff. Super, super glad to have you here and talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Grocery store clerks are also order flowers. Like, they weren't letting you in the grocery store if you didn't have a mask on. That was creating problems. So we have to all come together, under creation, under God, God with a capital G, and just say, hey, we're all brothers and sisters, man.
This goes into my final question, if you don't mind me asking. Is there anything else that you really want to hammer home to people, action that you don't see currently in independent media or out there in the world, that you think people need to do action-wise? Do you think perhaps, like, I create a movement, nature is the answer, right? And I have my own spin on things, and you're creating your own content, and a lot of other people are starting their own. Are those actions necessary? Do you think there's other actions that are necessary? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would believe that the next action that's necessary is to say no, and not just no, like online, but no means not, as in you're not doing this shit, as we're not having this, as in we're not believing you, as in you're not sticking nothing in my body. No. And back up the no with action if needed. No, that's it. There has to be a line where human beings say, hey, we're going to protect ourselves if you aggress against us. We're saying no to this, and we have a natural law right to say no to this. And I think if you can do so in a calm voice and don't let your anger, because see, for whatever reason, people's anger gets judged as bad, and they get more judged as bad while these people talk in their little monotones on why they're trying to do this for your protection and blah, blah, blah. And of course you get angry at it. Read William Cooper's book. They want to win this war without firing a shot. So they're going to take whatever actions they need to take. So maybe I'll just calmly say, no, thank you. I got a phone call today from a woman's voice I recognized. She was from the Census Bureau. She's like, hey, may I speak to Daniel Arnold? And I was like, no, you may not. Have a nice day. Click and hung up. No means not. Just start saying no and meaning it, and backing up the no with a no action. What would be a no, you're not doing that, or no, I'm not doing that action if you need to? Not saying get violent, saying we have a right to defend ourselves and get with other like-minded people. You have to form groups. We're going to be groups. And then groups can form bigger groups. And I mean, that's what we're going to actually need to do. It's going to come to a point. Voluntary, get together and help each other out. But just, we have to back up the no's and say no in real life. That means going to a grocery store and not putting on your mask. That means if a doctor says you got to wear your mask in here, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do it. You're not going to make me. You have to do it in a way where you're come across confident and calm, because I'll even start talking lower to somebody to get them to calm down, because then they have to quiet down to hear you, and it helps to keep you calm, because internally there's a rage burning, and I want to explode on them when they do that, and that's not going to help. Let them take the first action and be ready to respond to that action.
Right.
Let them look like the bad guys that they actually are. That's what I would say. I wish I had something else.
No, that's huge. And of course, like you said before, I mean, you can express anger, but not always, right? There's a time and place to know, like, maybe I shouldn't express anger here, or I could express anger here. As long as I'm still expressing myself, I'm not suppressing my internal feelings. If I feel something is wrong, I'm going to probably speak up about something that's wrong. I completely agree that the only answer is no. I did a video on 4 steps to change the world, and the first one is get people to know what it is, and educate people even further, and then some community that all has that same knowledge just says no, whether they stop paying taxes, just as every other revolution in the past, except it's an awakening, not even a revolution. They're not taking up arms to the state, they're just defending themselves, like you said. And then the step 4 is just the generations after that learn from what they did. It's documented, perhaps it was videotaped, and perhaps they had symbolism, perhaps they had material to show why they did what they did, and then everybody sees, and then the media picks up, and that's how I envision it. At least I agree it has to happen one way or another. I think a movement is necessary to bring those numbers together, and that's, I think, my own view on that, but because I don't know if everybody wants to use the same symbolism, and that's something that anarchists are like, we're free-minded, we shouldn't join groups or clubs, but I think some level of organization might be necessary to create the change we want.
That's true. And there's going to be, I think, in an anarchist environment, in a real anarchist, higher conscious type of society, there would be natural leaders in certain areas, like in technology, for instance. You know more than me, and you know more probably than a lot of people. So they're going to come to you as a teacher of that, to listen to what you have to say about that. So so you're a facilitator in a sense. You're leading, but you're not ruling.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. And the people got different ways they want to put that, but it means the same thing.
I consider you one. I consider you definitely a natural teacher, natural leader.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing what you do. I want everybody to check out your work, spiritualanarchist93.com. I appreciate you. Is there anything else you would like to say?
I'll talk forever if you let me. But I would just like to say thank you. I thank the One Great Work Network. Thank Mark Passio for putting it together. Thank people like him that, really inspired me. Thanks David Icke. Thanks to all the people out there that are really doing something. And hey, I told Mark this in person at Anarchadelphia, you're being heard.
Yeah.
He was being heard in 19. He was being heard before that. Now people are really, listening. But I mean, that's all I gotta say is, man, thank all you. I'm appreciative of all you guys. I like making new friends that are like-minded. I wish I didn't have to know any of you. to be honest, under these circumstances, I'd love to meet you someplace else. Float Fest was really that nice type of anarchist environment. I dug how it was and how people just kind of didn't know each other but gelled together really well. And I look at that and I say to myself, that was like Woodstock for anarchists. Let's just say that's what Float Fest was like. And I dug that. So Yeah, that's how I'll end it, man. I wish I didn't have to know you guys, but I'm glad I do, and I'm in good company as far as what's going on, man. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's Dan Arnold for everybody. Again, he's an author of Violence and Ego, Understanding the Principles of Functional Self-Defense, and Rise from Darkness. Who are they? So check out those books to learn more from him, and check out his website. You're also on Odyssey, Rumble, right?
Odyssey and Rumble as of now. I deplatformed me from YouTube, but whatever. So I'm on Odyssey and Rumble, and eventually I'll get to the other ones.
And everybody will get a free download of Rise from Darkness, Who Are They, as well, for the summit. If you want to see a lot more talks like this with a lot of other speakers, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for joining me, Dan Arnold and Aaron Butler, as always.
Thank you. Thank you, man.